My name is Callum Mercer. I'm 48 years old, and for the past 12 years I've worked as a security consultant for mid-sized corporations across the Midwest. Most people see me as just another guy in khakis and polo shirts, driving a Honda Accord to client meetings in Indianapolis, Columbus, and Detroit. What they don't know is that before I settled into suburban life in Carmel, Indiana, I spent 15 years working for agencies that don't officially exist, in places that aren't supposed to be on any map. I met Marissa at a charity gala in downtown Indianapolis back in 2012. She was 32 then, working as a pharmaceutical sales rep for Eli Lilly, stunning in that effortless way that made every man in the room turn when she walked by. I was immediately drawn to her intelligence and ambition. We married 2 years later in a beautiful ceremony at the Indiana Roof Ballroom, surrounded by friends and family who believed we were the perfect match. For 11 years, I thought we had built something solid together. Our colonial-style home on Meridian Street was worth $850,000. My consulting firm, Mercer Security Solutions, was pulling in close to $2.3 million annually, and we had investment accounts that would ensure a comfortable retirement. Marissa had climbed the corporate ladder at Lilly, earning a six-figure salary managing their Midwest territory. From the outside, we looked like the American dream personified. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared on a Tuesday morning in February 2025. I was in my home office reviewing a security assessment for a manufacturing plant in Fort Wayne, when Marissa's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, and the message notification kept going off. Something about the persistence made my old instincts kick in. In my previous life, patterns like this usually meant trouble. The text was from someone named D with a heart emoji. "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful. Same place as always." I felt my stomach drop, but my training kicked in immediately. Never react emotionally. Gather intelligence first. Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted what I privately called Operation Clarity. I used skills I'd hoped never to need again on American soil. I followed Marissa on her supposed client dinners and discovered she was meeting with Dorian Blackwell, a high-powered divorce attorney with offices in the Chase Tower downtown. Blackwell, 47 years old, married with 2 teenage kids, had a reputation for handling messy divorces for Indiana's wealthy elite. The irony wasn't lost on me. My unfaithful wife was having an affair with a divorce lawyer. But what I discovered next made the adultery look like a minor transgression. During one of their meetings at the Conrad Indianapolis Hotel Bar, I managed to get close enough to overhear their conversation. They weren't just planning to end our marriage. They were orchestrating my complete financial destruction. "Rhett confirmed he'll handle the case," Blackwell said, swirling his bourbon. "With the precedents we'll cite about psychological abuse and financial control, we can justify awarding her 70% of everything. The business, the house, the investments, all of it." Marissa leaned closer to him. "And the restraining order? Filed the moment we submit the papers. We'll claim you fear for your safety due to his military background and secretive behavior. By the time he knows what's happening, he'll be locked out of his own company and banned from coming within 500 feet of his own home." The Rhett they mentioned was Judge Rhett Langford, a 58-year-old Marion County Superior Court judge who'd been appointed to the bench 13 years earlier. I'd heard whispers about Langford in certain circles, rumors about favorable rulings for attorneys who contributed to his wife's various charity foundations. As I sat in that hotel bar, listening to my wife and her lover plan my destruction with the help of a corrupt judge, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my operational days. The cold, calculating calm that comes before launching a mission. They thought they were dealing with a suburban security consultant who would roll over and accept whatever scraps they threw him. They had no idea who they were really up against. That night, I sat in my study staring at the city lights beyond our window, processing what I'd learned. In my former life, when faced with a complex enemy network, the first rule was simple: know your targets better than they know themselves. so I began building psychological profiles on all three conspirators. Dorian Blackwell had graduated from Indiana University Maurer School of Law in 2002, middle of his class, nothing spectacular. But he'd built his reputation on one thing: ruthlessness in divorce proceedings. His firm, Blackwell & Associates, occupied the entire 23rd floor of the Chase Tower, and his Ferrari 488 GTB parked in the executive garage suggested he charged accordingly. Public records showed he'd been divorced himself in 2019, paying his ex-wife $900,000 in the settlement. Apparently, he'd learned from that experience. Judge Rhett Langford was more interesting. Appointed by Governor Mike Pence in 2012, Langford had presided over hundreds of divorce cases. What caught my attention was the pattern in his rulings. Attorneys who donated to the Langford Family Foundation, his wife's pet charity, seemed to win favorable decisions at a statistically impossible rate. The foundation's tax filings were public record, and the donor list read like a who's who of Indianapolis family law attorneys. As for Marissa, I realized I'd been blind to signs that were obvious in retrospect. The new workout routine that started 6 months ago. The sudden interest in expensive lingerie from Victoria's Secret. The way she'd angle her phone away when texting. Classic operational security failures that I'd missed because I'd let my guard down at home. But they'd made a critical error in their planning. They assumed I was just another wealthy husband who'd roll over when hit with legal papers. They had no idea I still maintained contact with my former colleagues. I made 3 phone calls that week. The first was to Danny Rodriguez, now running a private investigation firm in Chicago after 20 years with the DEA. The second was to Sarah Mitchell, a forensic accountant who'd helped the FBI unravel white-collar crimes before going independent. The third was to someone I'll call Thompson, a cybersecurity expert whose real name and background I can't share, but whose skills in digital surveillance were unmatched. I need a full workup on 3 targets, I told Danny during our meeting at a Starbucks in Broad Ripple. Financial records, communication patterns, travel schedules, personal habits. Everything. Danny studied me across the table. How deep are we going, Cal? Deep enough to find the truth, but we stay completely legal. No breaking and entering, no illegal surveillance, no hacking. Everything we collect has to be admissible in court or accessible through public records and legitimate investigative techniques. Within 10 days, my team had assembled a comprehensive picture of the conspiracy. Sarah's financial analysis revealed that Blackwell had been borrowing heavily against his firm's accounts, likely to fund his expensive lifestyle. His Ferrari payment was 3 months behind, and he owed $180,000 in back taxes to the IRS. The man projecting success was actually drowning in debt. Thompson's work was more delicate. He identified that Blackwell and Marissa were using a messaging app called Signal for their communications, believing it gave them privacy. What they didn't know was that Thompson had identified a vulnerability in how Blackwell's law firm's network handled app synchronization. Without accessing their phones directly, he could monitor when messages were sent and received, and cross-reference that data with location tracking from publicly available sources. Judge Langford proved to be the most corrupt of the 3. Danny's investigation revealed that in the past 5 years, attorneys who donated at least $25,000 to the Langford Family Foundation won 87% of their cases in his courtroom. The foundation itself was a shell operation. It claimed to support educational initiatives for underprivileged children, but its tax filings showed that 78% of donations went to administrative costs, which included Langford's wife's $150,000 annual salary as executive director. More damaging was Langford's gambling problem. Danny discovered the judge had been making regular trips to the French Lick Resort and Casino, often losing $15,000 to $20,000 per weekend. The man was desperate for money, which explained why he was willing to sell favorable rulings. But the most valuable intelligence came from an unexpected source. Thompson had been monitoring the digital patterns around all 3 targets when he noticed something interesting. Blackwell's law firm used a cloud-based case management system that automatically backed up client communications to a server in Atlanta. The firm's IT security was laughably weak. They were using default passwords and hadn't updated their firewall in 3 years. "I'm not suggesting we access their system illegally," Thompson explained during one of our meetings. "But if someone were to anonymously tip off the Indiana State Bar about security vulnerabilities that could be exposing client confidentiality," I smiled. "In my old job, we called this creating opportunities for legitimate oversight." On March 18th, exactly 3 weeks after I'd discovered the affair, I received the divorce papers. Marissa served them through a process server who showed up at my office, making a scene in front of my employees. The papers accused me of emotional abuse, financial control, and creating an atmosphere of fear through intimidation tactics learned during military service. The restraining order was even more creative. It claimed I had threatened physical violence and exhibited dangerous behavioral patterns consistent with PTSD. I was banned from my own home and from contacting Marissa directly. Blackwell had crafted a narrative that painted me as an unstable veteran who'd used my specialized training to psychologically terrorize my wife. As I read through the legal documents in my car outside the office, I couldn't help but admire the thoroughness of their plan. They'd effectively neutralized me before I could mount any defense. Or so they thought. That evening, from my room at the Hampton Inn on Keystone Avenue, I made one final call to complete my team. The final call was to Marcus Webb, a retired FBI agent who now worked as a white-collar crime consultant for law enforcement agencies. Marcus and I had worked together on a joint task force in 2005, and he owed me a favor that had been collecting interest for 20 years. "I need you to look into something," I told him over coffee at Shapiro's Delicatessen on the North Side. "There might be some judicial irregularities worth investigating." Marcus studied me carefully. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that involve suspicious patterns in court rulings and charitable foundation donations." I slid him a USB drive containing Sarah's financial analysis of the Langford Family Foundation. "Everything on here was obtained through public records and legitimate investigation. No laws broken, no privacy violated." He pocketed the drive without looking at it. "If there's substance to this, I know people who can get it to the right investigators. Federal prosecutors, Indiana Judicial Qualifications Commission, the works. That's all I'm asking for, justice through the system." While Marcus worked his contacts to get the evidence to the right people, I put the second phase of my plan into motion. I called the Indiana State Bar Association's ethics hotline and reported concerns about security vulnerabilities at Blackwell and Associates that could compromise client confidentiality. I provided specific technical details that Thompson had identified, including the default passwords and outdated firewall systems. The Bar Association took the security concerns seriously and scheduled an audit of Blackwell's firm for the following week. What they discovered during that audit was worse than anyone expected. Not only were client communications stored on unsecured servers, but Blackwell had been mixing client funds with his personal accounts to cover his gambling debts and Ferrari payments. The man who was planning to steal my assets had been stealing from his own clients for months. The third domino fell when the IRS received an anonymous tip about unreported income connected to the Langford Family Foundation. Someone had noticed the statistical impossibility of certain attorneys' success rates in Langford's courtroom and connected it to foundation donation patterns. That someone was me, but the evidence spoke for itself. Meanwhile, Marissa was living in our house, sleeping in our bed, probably with Blackwell, believing she'd successfully eliminated me from the equation. The restraining order gave her a false sense of security. What she didn't know was that Thompson had been monitoring publicly available digital signatures from the neighborhood, cell tower pings, social media check-ins, and other data that painted a picture of the comings and goings around our street. On April 15th, everything began to unravel for them simultaneously. The Indianapolis Star ran a front-page story about the federal investigation into judicial corruption in Marion County. While they couldn't name Langford specifically due to the ongoing investigation, anyone familiar with local legal circles knew exactly who they were talking about. The article mentioned suspicious patterns in divorce settlements and possible connections to charitable foundation donations. That same morning, the Indiana State Bar Association suspended Blackwell's license pending their investigation into client fund misappropriation. His Ferrari was repossessed from the Chase Tower parking garage while he was in a client meeting. By noon, Blackwell and Associates had closed its doors, leaving dozens of clients scrambling to find new representation. But the most satisfying moment came that evening. Marissa called me, violating the restraining order she'd helped orchestrate. "Callum, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm not supposed to talk to you, Marissa. Your lawyer got a restraining order, remember? Dorian's in jail. They arrested him this afternoon for embezzlement, and there are FBI agents asking questions about Judge Langford. What's happening?" I could hear the panic in her voice. Her carefully constructed plan was collapsing, and she had no idea why. "I'm just a simple security consultant," I said calmly. "I wouldn't know anything about federal investigations or legal ethics violations. Don't play dumb with me. This is too much of a coincidence." "You know what's not a coincidence, Marissa. The fact that you chose to have an affair with a criminal and plan your divorce with a corrupt judge. Those were choices. These are consequences." The next day, Judge Langford recused himself from all pending cases and announced he was taking a leave of absence to address personal matters. The Indiana Judicial Qualifications Commission had opened a formal investigation, and federal prosecutors were building a case for bribery and corruption. With her lawyer in jail and her judge under federal investigation, Marissa found herself in an impossible position. The restraining order she'd used as a weapon was now worthless. No attorney would take her case given the circumstances, and the motion for emergency asset seizure that Blackwell had prepared was tied up in the ethics investigation. But I wasn't done yet. During the FBI's investigation of Blackwell's embezzlement, they discovered something that proved invaluable to my case. Blackwell, ever the paranoid lawyer, had been secretly recording his conversations with clients, including Marissa, as insurance against potential malpractice claims. Those recordings were now evidence in multiple investigations. In one particularly damaging recording, Marissa could be heard discussing how to make sure Callum looks dangerous enough that the judge will give us everything. She'd knowingly participated in filing false accusations about domestic violence and PTSD, potentially committing perjury and fraud. On April 28th, exactly 10 weeks after I'd discovered the affair, I received a call from Marissa's new attorney, a public defender who'd taken her case pro bono because no private firm would touch it. "Mr. Mercer, my client would like to discuss an amicable settlement," he said. "I'm listening." "She's prepared to withdraw all accusations and requests in exchange for a simple no-fault divorce. 50-50 split of assets, no alimony, no restraining orders." I let the silence stretch for a moment. "Tell your client that ship sailed when she decided to commit perjury and conspiracy with a criminal lawyer and a corrupt judge. I'll see her in court, assuming she can find a judge who isn't under federal investigation." The beautiful irony was that Marissa had created this situation herself. By choosing nuclear war instead of an honest conversation about our marriage, she'd aligned herself with criminals and corruption. Now she was going down with their ship. 6 weeks later, the dominoes finished falling. Dorian Blackwell pleaded guilty to embezzling $340,000 from client accounts and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. The Ferrari he'd used to impress Marissa was sold at auction to pay restitution to his victims. His wife divorced him while he was awaiting sentencing, taking their Geist Reservoir home and custody of their children. The man who'd specialized in destroying families through divorce had his own destroyed by his greed. Judge Rhett Langford fared even worse. The FBI investigation revealed he'd accepted over $250,000 in disguised bribes through his wife's fake charity over 5 years. Federal prosecutors charged him with bribery, conspiracy, and tax evasion. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His wife was charged as a co-conspirator and received 3 years. The Langford Family Foundation was dissolved, and their assets were seized to pay fines and restitution. But Marissa's downfall was the most complete. The FBI recordings revealed the full extent of her conspiracy. She'd not only planned the affair and fraudulent divorce, but had researched my background specifically to use my military service against me in court. She'd even practiced her testimony about feeling threatened by my dangerous skills, preparing to lie under oath to steal everything I'd worked for. When the Marion County Prosecutor's Office filed perjury and conspiracy charges against her, she finally understood the magnitude of her situation. The pharmaceutical industry doesn't tolerate employees with felony convictions, so Eli Lilly terminated her immediately. With Blackwell in prison and no money for a good defense attorney, she was assigned the same public defender who'd tried to negotiate the settlement. The divorce proceedings that were supposed to destroy me instead became a showcase of her crimes. With Blackwell's recordings, Thompson's digital evidence, and Sarah's financial analysis, the new judge, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Morrison, saw through Marissa's lies immediately. "Mrs. Mercer," Judge Morrison said during one hearing in late June, "the evidence clearly shows you conspired with a criminal attorney and a corrupt judge to defraud your husband through perjured testimony and false accusations. This court will not reward such behavior." In the end, I received 85% of our assets. Marissa got to keep some personal belongings and a small settlement that was quickly consumed by her legal debts and the restitution she owed for her role in the conspiracy. The restraining order that was supposed to keep me away from my own property was dissolved when Judge Morrison reviewed the fabricated evidence it was based on. I moved back to my house on Meridian Street on a Tuesday afternoon in early July, while Marissa was at another court hearing for her criminal case. But the most satisfying moment came in late July. I was having lunch at St. Elmo's Steakhouse with a potential client when I saw her. Marissa was working as a hostess at a chain restaurant in Castleton, having lost her pharmaceutical career and burned through what little money she'd received in legal fees. She looked older, defeated, wearing a uniform instead of the designer clothes she'd once favored. She saw me too, and for a moment our eyes met across the restaurant. I could see the recognition, the shame, the understanding that her choices had led to this moment. I nodded politely and returned to my conversation with my client, a Fortune 500 company that wanted to upgrade their entire security infrastructure. Mercer Security Solutions had not only survived the attempted destruction, it had thrived. The publicity around the case had actually brought me new clients who were impressed by how I'd handled the situation. My revenue had increased by 40% since the divorce was finalized. Last week I received a letter from Marissa. She'd pleaded guilty to perjury and conspiracy charges and received 2 years probation and 500 hours of community service. In the letter she apologized and claimed she'd been manipulated by Blackwell and didn't understand what she was doing. I threw the letter away without reading it twice. Actions have consequences, and her actions had spoken clearly about who she really was. The irony of the entire situation wasn't lost on me. Marissa, Blackwell, and Langford had tried to use the legal system as a weapon against me, but their own crimes had turned that weapon against them. They'd assumed I was just another suburban husband who would roll over when attacked. They never imagined I'd fight back with the same methodical precision I'd once used in much more dangerous situations overseas. The difference was that this time, I didn't have to operate in the shadows or bend any rules. Truth and justice were on my side, and the system, when it worked properly, was powerful enough to destroy those who tried to corrupt it. Today, I'm still living in Carmel, still running my security consulting firm, still helping companies protect themselves from threats they don't see coming. The only difference is that I'm no longer naive about the threats that can come from inside your own home. I learned that the skills I'd hoped never to use on American soil, surveillance, intelligence gathering, strategic planning, were exactly what I needed to protect myself from domestic enemies. Sometimes the most dangerous adversaries aren't foreign agents or terrorists. Sometimes they're the people who sleep next to you and promise to love you until death do you part. Marissa taught me that betrayal doesn't announce itself with dramatic confrontations. It whispers in hotel bars and hides behind legal papers and fake tears. But truth has a way of surfacing, and justice has a way of finding those who think they're clever enough to avoid it. The house on Meridian Street feels different now, cleaner somehow. I've upgraded all the security systems naturally. Old habits die hard, and I've learned never to let my guard down completely again. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment letting me know what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications of new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.